Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you had a very enjoyable, inspirational afternoon, had a chance to zoom in and zoom out, and just had a lot of good talks and discussions with your colleagues. Now it's time to revert to the plenary session again, and it's a great pleasure to welcome with me here our good colleague Stuart. Stuart Bronson has an educational background from University College in London and a Bachelor of Science from London School of Economics. He has a background in mergers and acquisitions and a record of accomplishment of delivering business turnarounds in various industries. And that includes various activities in Maersk Oil since 2011. Once again, we're going to film this session, so please be aware of that when you ask questions. We need to get you streamed. And then finally, please help me in welcoming and giving Stuart a warm welcome here for the last plenary session. Welcome.
I have a confession to make. Unlike probably everybody in the room, I'm not an oil and gas specialist. Although for the last 7 years, I've been pretending to be at Maersk Oil. At least that's how it feels sometimes. And I'd like to begin with a story. It's around 1988, and General Motors did a joint venture with Toyota. It was called NUMMI in the USA, and it was a joint venture so GM could learn from Toyota's. I have Total on my head for some reason. From Toyota's way of working, and GM could really try and take it to the next level, and Toyota could learn around the USA. And as part of this, as this was starting up, one of the general managers from GM went to Toyota. This was back in the late 80s. And he went to the factory, and he saw something that absolutely astounded him. He was walking in the factory floor, and there were a couple of workers who were standing there looking at some equipment, around some car seats, some bolts, and they effectively pulled what's called an andon cord. And the whole production line shut down. And the GM manager was there in his head thinking, that's $15,000 a minute. That's what GM had drilled into them. If you shut down the production line, there better be a damn good reason. It's $15,000 a minute for that production line being shut down. So he watched what happened. The two workers stood there looking at this nut, and then they called over the manager. The manager came over, had a conversation with them. It's a conversation around this nut being over-talked with the tool they were doing, and translated to him, and they were saying, well, there's a tool that we can get. I know it from a factory I used to work in. It costs $4,000 for this tool. And the manager said, walked away. And he came back 15 minutes later with a new tool prototype. 15 minutes. Started using the tool, production line started again. 2 days later, everyone at the same workstation had these tools. This was in the late 80s. And so this is what he took home about, how Toyota's working. And I think the message for me is, my theory is that cash kills creativity. How easy would it have been to spend that $4,000, buy that tool, but with a completely different mindset? They were able to, with creativity and with support and the right structure in the company, they were able to do things better, cheaper, more efficiently. So cash kills creativity. What I'd like to take you through is a story about, I think, my perspective on oil and gas and where it is today, held up to other industries, and then look at what are the next steps that it could look at doing. Is this working? No. So firstly, who am I? Stuart Bronson, as Bo introduced. I'm an economist as a background, which taught me that theories are great. There's lots of good theories and models, but most of them fail when you take them up to real life. Have to apply them. I'm a chartered accountant. It's 3 years working as a chartered accountant, various industries. And what I took out of that is the numbers are just a symptom of whatever's going on. What's interesting is what's underneath the numbers. What's driving those numbers to be however they are. Worked in various industries, from entertainment industry to geothermal, seafood, banking, property. And by doing that, I realized that there's no such thing as a special business. No business is special. They might have some unique things that they're doing, but they all work in the same way. They're all successful for the same reasons. Currently, I'm head of Procurement and Supply Chain. Been here for 9 months in SBO. And that really just showed me that oil and gas is complex. It's one of the most complex industries there. The amount of specialists that you have to work with just to get that barrel out of the ground safely, it astounds me every day. I'm also risk-loving. I love change. If it's not changing, I'm not interested. Doesn't sit too well with process engineers, but it's a different perspective that I have to lots of the people that I work with. That I also see myself as an integrator. I think the value in oil and gas is how you integrate all these different specialities, connect the dots together. Business turnarounds. I think all businesses can be turned around, no matter which way they're heading. It's just like a boat. You could have a rowboat that can turn around in a second, or you could have a tanker. It might take longer, but everything can be turned around. And I've got a track record for the last 7 years of everywhere that I've worked of reducing the cost in companies. But, I mean, what do I know about oil and gas? That was my last CEO before I joined Maersk. Not the 10-year-old girl with pink hair, but the guy there, Magnus Skaving. I worked at Lazytown, did a business turnaround there, where for 2.5 years, we went in, you understood what drove the business, what made it tick, how did it work, what were its value drivers. And then we made it profitable for the first time ever, and we sold it to Cartoon Network. So while I might not know as much as oil and gas about anybody in this room, to me, all businesses are the same. They succeed for the same things. They have the same fundamentals that drive it. Every business, you've got to understand what are the value drivers. What are the key things that they do differently that creates value for somebody? And then around that, you've got to build the right business model around this. So you can really, it's great having them, but unless you're, got the right structure to support them, they're worthless. So you've got to have the right business model, processes all around this. You've got to be in the right market. You've got to be in a market that's large enough, that's growing, that you understand. You can get a niche in it. And you've got to have a team. And the team, for me, I equate that with execution. You can have the best product in the world, the best process, the best structure, but you need a team. I kind of look at it like cannons in warfare. You could have all the cannons in the world, cannonballs in the world, but it's the cannons that are the ones that execute. So you need to execute. You need those cannons all around. No matter how much ammunition you got, it's worthless unless you've got the right cannons to execute it. And then really close to my heart is that you need really great performance management systems. So you know at all times what's changing in the environment that I need to be aware of, what's changing internally that I need to be aware of. And you can react, make the right decision. And then there's innovation. If you look at valuations of companies, what's the valuation of a company in 2 years' time, 80% to 90% of that valuation that's made by the market is based on its current profitability. 10% is based on the innovation. But if you value what's the value of a company in 10 years' time, 80% of its valuation is based on its innovation and only 20% on its current profitability. So if you're looking at long-term value creation, it's all about innovation. And I'm an economist, so just a basic model here that I like to look at businesses. How do they compare across industries? So this is commonly called a BCG matrix or a growth share matrix. I'll run you quickly through how it works. You're probably familiar with it. Bottom corner here, we have dogs. These are companies with low growth, not generating a lot of cash. And they move up, become a question mark when they've got a bit more of the so they're growing, but they've still got a low portion of the market. And then move over to become stars. They've got a big bit of the market share and they're growing quickly. And as they mature, life cycle of the products, growth slows, they move down to become a cow, cash cow. And a typical example could be someone's making cupcakes in their living room, in their kitchen. It's a good little business, earns them some money. It's a dog at the moment. They open a shop, start to get some growth. They're still not getting lots of money, but it's a great shop, popular queues around the street. And then they decide to expand. They open other franchises in town, nationally, internationally. It becomes a star, gets that market share, it's growing. And then, as it stops to grow, it becomes a cash cow. And that's quite a typical company growth. You can apply it to many companies. But then, people don't stay cash cows forever. One that always comes to mind for me is Kodak. It was a great company. It had a massive market share, highly profitable, lots of cash flow for its investors. And then along came the digital camera. A little bit too slow to react. Other companies like Fuji reacted a bit quicker, still have a business. So where does oil and gas sit? Any guesses from the audience? Help you out. Say it's a cash cow. It's not growing massively. Generates money nearly every year. Sometimes it's up and down with the oil price, but generally it's been the most profitable industry in the world ever. It was definitely a star at one point, so now it's a cash cow. So how do you prevent it going the Kodak way? First of all, I'd like to start to look at what are the other industries How does it compare with the other ones? So I put on a few other new up-and-coming companies. Tesla. Fantastic car. Great at innovation. But they haven't got a huge market share. Apart from Norway, actually, where they're the fastest selling car. In Denmark, it's the Volkswagen Up. Might have something to do with the tax. But it's there. And the ambition, obviously, is to go to become a star when it expands its market share. Amazon, Jeff Bezos, richest man in the world now. It went from books, accessories, widening. Now it's even entered the acquisition of Whole Foods. And he's the richest man in the world right now. Then we have Google, one of the world's largest advertising companies. And it probably was up where Amazon is. Probably not quite so rapid growth anymore. Coming down. So when you look at all of these, what's different about where these are in oil and gas? I'd say these new companies, they have a different way of looking at things, I think, than traditionally. What they're focused on now a lot more is sustainability and sustainability of their business model. I look at it as a stool with three legs. And so what they have is financials. Obviously, all companies are out to maximize shareholder value. But they're also looking at community. How do they get the support from the government, the people, the employees, the other suppliers around that? And then the environment. What do they have to do to support the environment around them in terms of whether it be emissions or other legislation they have to keep. So it's really about creating sustainable companies. So they're doing it well. So I want to take you through the community aspect in the world of oil and gas. And historically, oil and gas has had great support from its community. And if you look at this chart, this explains the growth of human population. It's on a logarithmic scale. From all the major inventions that we've had over the years. And as you see with each one of these, they really fuel the next level of development. And you can see with the event of fossil fuels around coal, and then you start to have the oil and gas, electricity, just goes up exponentially. And so it's been in the interest of all the governments to support oil and gas companies. Because it fuels growth, fuels economic growth, national security, or energy security. It's a real strategic investment support from the governments. And I'd say now we're at a stage where we've also had a shift in balance between the national oil companies and the international oil companies. Previously, it was quite easy for the national oil companies. They didn't have the capital. Oil companies came in with the capital, could make these investments, very favorable terms. But now, I'd propose that it's no longer the case. National oil companies are a lot more demanding. They're not so capital deficient. What they do tend to be more deficient of in terms of the governments is keeping their balances, the national debts in control, the amount of subsidies, etc. they have to get. So there's a shift towards, well, we'd like to have the investment from the national oil companies to actually what we really want from international oil companies is low lifting costs. That's what they're demanding. And I think when you look at this, there's $5 trillion in the world of subsidies given to fossil fuel companies through tax breaks, direct subsidies, etc. And I think with this national debt and this pressure, that's not sustainable. So you will see this level of subsidies and tax breaks dropping in the future. And the question is, what's going to fuel that development in the future if it's not oil and gas? And then the environment. I think it says 195 countries here, but that's excluding the US, who have obviously pulled out, which is about keeping the global average temperature to 2 degrees in the Paris Accord. What does that mean for fossil fuels? There's lots in there about agricultural practices, etc. as well, but for fossil fuels, you know, according to the climate experts, there's 3 times as much fossil fuels already in the ground, let alone any exploration work, but just proven reserves in the ground, 3 times as much, that if you burned even 1/3 of it, you'd reach that 2 degrees. And there's also legislation that's going to come. We're going to get increased legislation around environmental controls, safety controls. We're going to get, this makes it more expensive. I would expect very soon we're going to start to see the first of the tobacco-style damage cases. There's already lots of interest piling up against Exxon for the denial of climate change, the suppressing of information. So we're going to get lots more legislation, so it's becoming a lot more difficult. But actually, I think one of the ones that's going to hit first is this war for talent. Is that there is a huge demand for great technical talent. Oil and gas is built on having these technical specialists who are great at what they do. How sustainable is that nowadays? If you go to the universities and find the top technical talents, how many of them choose oil and gas over software engineering or other specialities in there? It's going to be increasingly competitive to get the right people, the people that execute your business, give you the innovation. And then there's the financials. Oil is a commodity. It goes up, it goes down. And the future oil prices, where are they going to be? Is it going to be $20, $60, $80? To me, it's irrelevant. Because actually, there's something core that's changing here, which is to remain profitable, there's 2 things you can do. You can influence your revenues, or reduce your costs. And whilst oil is a commodity, all companies haven't made properties like it's a commodity. And I'll explain that further in a little bit. So if you look at that 3-legged stool and the changes in the environment around in the last 15, 20 years, how stable is that stool? It's not going to stay as it was, that's for sure. So, why isn't oil and gas, why have they been so profitable in the past? It's because they've had a monopoly. When I mean a monopoly, I don't mean a monopoly in the sense that you're the only producer of that good and no one else can buy it, because oil's a commodity, anyone can buy it. but they've actually had a monopoly or monopolistic behavior with the national oil companies and the governments in the world, because they've been able to control the terms in which they have the agreements and the partnership agreements, joint ventures. And they've been very favorable terms. And so when you have a monopoly, you really can influence your revenues, because you don't have a commodity that anyone can buy, but it's differentiated. You charge a higher price. And all businesses, really great successful businesses, are built around having a monopoly. Just take Amazon. Jeff Bezos, when he was 30 years old, decided, wanted to create a internet sales channel, Amazon. And he was looking for a product. He looked at all the products and he said, I'm going to choose books. I'm going to choose books because they're cheap and they're lightweight and easy to transport. So he chose books. So in a short amount of time, with phenomenal growth, he created the world's largest bookstore. So he had an absolute monopoly in that area. So it meant that he could control the prices and the terms in which he was doing it. So he did fantastically. And then he took that model and expanded it to other electronic products, clothing, etc., and kept on expanding that. And at each of those times, he kept the monopoly, which allowed him to make good margins, keep that coming. And so when you're a monopoly, like Amazon, and they've just taken on Walmart now with the bricks and mortar stores, with Whole Foods, how do you protect that? How do you protect your profits? You don't have to think about lowering costs at that point. You just have to concentrate on keeping your monopoly. You have to keep your market share. So that's how you protect your profits. The easiest way is to protect your monopoly. You don't want to be seen as a monopoly, because then you get lots of questions from monopolies, mergers, commissions, etc., like I think Microsoft have when they launched the browser with their Windows, and they've suddenly broken up because they were behaving like a monopoly, but they're also seen as monopoly. So all the other companies, Google, it's absolute monopoly on search. 90% of searches are done through Google. But it's not a monopoly. It's an advertising company. It only has less than 2% of the world's advertising revenues. It's tiny. It's not a monopoly in terms of anyone. But that's how they behave. They behave like a monopoly. In each venture they go into monopolize it, because that's how you protect your profits. So what do you do when you lose a monopoly? When you lose a monopoly, for me, the example that comes to mind is Maersk Line. Maersk Line, when it was growing, it was the only company in the world, the shipping company, if you wanted to get a container from Shanghai to Cape Town, you would know exactly on what day it was going to arrive. And it created a monopoly around that service. And then, what happened? It's a free market, freedom of information, people knew what they're doing, the service, they developed, they imitated. And it lost that monopoly. So it lost that ability to charge consumers whatever price they wanted for that extra service. So it lost the monopoly and actually had a commodity. It just had a commodity that it was not in control of price. So it meant it wasn't it had a bit of control of revenues, it could do sales, but it was limited. So when you're not in control of your revenues, what's the other angle that you can do to influence your profit? Cut costs. So when you have a commodity project that isn't a monopoly, what you have to do is to continuously cut costs. And that's what Maersk Line did. Every year, 10% further reduction in costs. That's allowed them to remain as the world's largest carrier, because that's how they can differentiate, because they lost their monopoly. And really, when you think about, say, the example of Kodak or the example of Maersk Line, what really happened was the environment around them changed dramatically, and they had to react. And this isn't new. This is a theory that's been around for over 100 years. And I assume most of you in this room buy into it. Charles Darwin. It isn't the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. So the companies that adapt, they adapt quickly. And so I think about this and always try and relate this to, oil and gas. You've got a changing environment around. So what do you have to do? What do we have to do to adapt and survive? I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. I think we have to look to other companies that do adapt. Which brings you back to the story I told at the beginning about Toyota. Which is, how do they do this? As a company, they are phenomenal. For 20 years, over 20 years, they've had increasing growth and profitability. The only year where they didn't increase was during the 2008 crisis, where their profits dropped. This is the same time where all the other US car manufacturers had to get bailed out from the company by the government, and there were massive negative profits. So Toyota continuously just had a tremendous track record in doing this, and it's not by chance. They do this because they might be really large and agile, but they're supremely agile. They can react so quickly to anything. And going back to the story of when they asked for the tool and it was rejected, what they looked at was, they have the belief that money kills creativity. So the answer isn't in just throwing money at it. It's in, how do we fix this issue at hand? How do we react very quickly to this? So what they believe that the people on the shop floor, on the factory floor, they're the experts in what they're doing. They're the absolute experts. And their responsibility as the experts is to fix the issues that they see, because they're the experts. And their manager's role isn't to order them what to do, it's to support them in whatever they need to fix the issues that they see. And they have lots of other principles, 14 principles. I'm just going to pull a couple out. And one of them for me is this pull principle. They work on a one-piece flow. Something comes in, that triggers then the demand for something else coming in. And think about the beauty of that. Whatever happens in real time, you have information around everything what is happening, and you can control your decisions based on that real-time information coming in. The ability to react is so quick. And the other thing is continuous improvement. And really, for me, that's summed up by they have a real common goal to eliminate waste in everything they do. And in that shop floor example, the waste they were eliminating was the fact that the workers on the factory floor, they were experts in what they were doing. And because they weren't happy with what they were doing and with the torque and the bolt, they had to find a solution to eliminate that waste. It was worth shutting down the production line to eliminate that waste. up front. And then they talk about quality right first time. This to me is a learning organization. They want to fix things forever rather than forever fixing them. And it's constantly about learning. How can we improve? How can we get this top quality? And they embrace failure. They celebrate failure. And what can we learn from it? And they have a real focus on their people, developing their people. And interestingly, that also means their suppliers, their community around them, because they're not in it alone. Their success is also their suppliers' success. And the most important thing for me is the go and see for yourself, where the management in Toyota, the top management, the people who decide the whole overall strategy for the Toyota group, 6 months of the year, all they do is go and see the Gemba walks. They're going to see every single Toyota facility in the world for 6 months, the top management team. They go to see the retailers, they go to meet the customers, they meet the suppliers, they meet all the factories. They go everywhere, all levels, every aspect of the organization, because they want to know exactly what's affecting them, what's happening out there, what's happening all throughout their organization, what's happening in the market, what's happening with their suppliers, what's happening with their customers. They want to know and go see, experience everything. Then they spend the next 6 months in taking those learnings and trying to work with the business to say, so this is what we need to do. And it's a huge process where they take down, this is what we think, take it down the organization, it comes back up, iterates around before they agree. This is what we're going to now focus on. So you've got an organization that's huge, but it can react so quickly. It's the size of a tanker, but can turn like a rowing boat. And so what about oil and gas? How does it compare to an agile, quick reacting company like Toyota? When I look at it, it's a change that, if you look at the amount of change there has been in the last 15, 20 years in oil and gas around it, the support from the government, that has been hand in hand with the government, how stable is that? How much is that going to continue into the future? You're going to start seeing a lack of talent coming into the young talent that we need to drive the innovation coming in. I think importantly, we've got this loss of, the monopoly that we had. It's turning into a commodity with the NOCs, just demanding. We just want lower lifting cost. And you've got also, importantly, changes in demand. Legislation coming around lots of European countries, Japanese countries, saying electric cars will only be electric cars by 2020, 2030, 2040, whatever the date is. And there's, lots of movements for divestment of investment funds into oil and gas as well. So you're seeing coming up this changing in demand patterns for what was once a commodity, but then this commodity, as demand goes down, prices go down. So you've got these huge threats. And with all these companies, as it changed, these threats come extremely quickly and the whole environment shifts. There's only one option. You have to adapt. And the adaptations aren't always popular. They aren't always, met with open arms. But for me, it begins with this awareness. That's the most important thing. I think we need an awareness. This is what we're in. You can wait around for another oil price rise, and that may well happen. But for me, that's irrelevant, because we need to change the fundamentals of how we work to really shift the business to be this agile, reactive. Reactive not in a firefighting way, but reactive to understanding the environment and being able to take the right decisions. And so one of my proposals would be, said cash kills creativity, and we've had a lot of cash to burn. So what would happen if we cut the cash? I was in Croatia last week. I was with this crazy scientist. He was telling me a story how he was having a professor visit him from Berlin. He was coming to his house, and the scientist, he hadn't paid his bills. So it's winter, there was no lights in his flat. So what did he do? He looked around his workshop, he found 30 LEDs. What do I do with these? He took these LEDs and he created some bacteria solutions from yogurt and other things, and he created bacteria batteries that he fed with sugar to light these 30 LEDs. So in the middle of winter, this university professor came to visit him, and he had a bacteria lit house from stuff that he found around his garage and workshop. That didn't come because if he paid his bills, he would have never invented this bacteria battery. So whilst it's great to have funding, we need to do, research, we need to do this, actually, I think cash kills creativity. So what happens when we take that cash away? I think we'll focus on innovating on the right things. I think rather than, fixing, there's lots of problems in the world that we all love to go fix. But what are the right ones that we have to fix right now? It's about how do we adapt to the environment, and the environment is changing. We need to radically reduce the costs, change our organization to be more reactive. So what happens if we cut off the money? I think there's two things that would not just let everything fall over, which would be this radical innovation. What are the innovations that we can do to really just have a paradigm shift? Completely unmanned platforms. I don't have the ideas, but it's similar to this LED. If we don't have that money, we're going to get creative. We've got some of the best technical specialists in any industry. I'm pretty sure if we had the right circumstances and the right design, you could see what we needed to do, we'd get there. We do it on a daily basis when we have shutdowns on platforms, when this happens. We can create and find. We're immensely creative. But I think we're solving the wrong things. And the other part for me is on the continuous improvement, which is, how can we, I said, don't want to reinvent the wheel, but what do we learn from other industries? How do we get an awareness of the waste that we see all around us? How do we get that through all of our organization? So we can see it, and, when I did some lean training a few years ago, one of the simplest examples I had was, it just opened my eyes, made me see things in a different way. So I got home, I was making a cup of tea, and I just looked. This is extremely inefficient. I walk over here to get a tea bag, I go over here to pick up the kettle, then I have to walk back here to fill up the water. And I was like, that's motion waste. It's a small step. I rearranged the kitchen after that. But it's that mindset that how do we empower those people who are the experts that are seeing things on a daily basis to pull that and-on cord and say, let's stop this. This isn't efficient. I can see waste. I have that awareness of this waste around me. And then have the managers support them to fix it. Do whatever they needed to fix and eliminate that waste. So if you had that running, whilst you were fueling that, you got all the, all the real technical, great creative people in the business working on the right problems. I think if you cut that money, reduce the budgets, you would actually have a far better company to work with. And I think if you did that across the oil and gas industry, it would radically change our position, you know, against the other industries in the world. So my challenge to all of you in the room is, how adaptable are you? And what are you willing to do differently? Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very inspirational perspective. We have time for a few questions. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for a great talk. So you talked a lot about sort of internal innovation. If you look at the Center for Oil and Gas, it can be seen as an attempt by the DUC to remain or boost their competitiveness by externalizing their innovation efforts to the academic environment. Mm-hmm. How do you view that setup with a close interaction between academia and industry?
I think if you look at nearly all the major innovations in the world, they've come through partnerships with commercial entities, but then leveraging on the academic institutions. I think the innovation doesn't have to come from internally. It doesn't matter where it comes from. I think we just need that different mindset and actually focus on what are the real problems. And I think, you know, having institutions like the DHRTC, it's another lever that we can pull to get the innovation, but it's also our responsibility as a customer to say these are the real issues that we should be focusing on. These are the ones that's actually going to help us adapt and change. But I think the setup makes sense. I think it's just about focusing on the right problems. Yes?
Thank you for nice topics. Yeah, my question is, do you think it's possible we can find some ways we can, change the conditions and adapt the environment? But if possible, before it happened, maybe we can know it is the right change before we die.
So the question is, how do we know it's the right change before we do it? As I said at the beginning, I'm risk-loving. I embrace failure, and often you don't know if it's the right change. And there's no magic formula for knowing it. And I know engineers would love to have everything out there, lots of tornado plots and various things to make sure this is absolutely the right decision. And so from my experience as an economist, models are great, but you apply them to the real life, that's when you find out what works. Because they're only as good as their assumptions. But nearly all these assumptions come down to people and behaviors. And at that point, you can't predict people and behaviors at all. So the only way of doing it is by learning and finding out is to do it. You don't necessarily have to put both feet in. I think Silicon Valley has some great models that are around lean innovation, around creating a minimal viable product. So you create something, you test it. Can that be scaled? And you create something that doesn't scale just to test it. Does this work? Is this a fit? What can I change? How can I pivot? And then you can scale it up when you know that it's actually solving the problems that you want it to solve. And I think there's lots of, when I look at oil and gas compared to other companies like, I don't know, SpaceX, the pace of innovation, I think we're being left in the dust by them. I think we could learn a lot from their models, the way that you have small incubators and funded, and you spin something out of the main company infrastructure, towards a smaller startup mentality where they can afford to fail, they can afford just to run fast, iterate all the time continuously and a lot faster than any of us can. And then at some point, we take in those learnings.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Yes, I think I'm gonna get fired after this question, but it's easy for a cupcake company to innovate just by changing a recipe, or for an online bookstore to start selling electronics or music.
Yep.
How do you innovate in an industry which is based on a product which is not renewable, and even worse, that if you extract a third of what is left, you take humanity to a point of no return. So I get the feeling that your only answer to that is that, well, sorry, but most of us is not going to find a job, because that's the only solution is to reduce cost, and that's the only future for this industry. And as a young professional hoping to get a job in this industry with less and less hope, well, that's not very encouraging, is it?
And I painted a bit of a doomsday scenario. It's when you look at these fundamentals, they're changing, and they're changing fast, but there's no way that oil and gas will be gone in the next 10, 20, 30 years. When you look at all the actual real demand of other hydrocarbon-related products, etc., the lack of other viable products to take that, it will be here. But I think we have to change, again, what we're focusing on. And I think we just have more constraints to work with. And I think, again, constraints make us more creative. Because when you see something naturally, you want to, how can I work around this? What can I do? So we have got more constraints. It is more difficult. But there's still definitely a future, and it's not going to be, I think, in your lifetime. So.
All right. I think we are out of time now. I see there are actually several more questions, but we have to cut at this point. I think we all took a lot of notes along. I certainly took one. It said, cut the cost and stimulate creativity. That's one good one. In the poster session following, we cannot cut the cost. We can do other things to stimulate creativity. So I think the session coming now, don't think about cutting costs or taking away resources, but let's use the resources we have, and there's so much power in this room. So I won't take that one along into the poster session, but it was a lot of great points, very nice perspectives. Thank you very much for that. Let's give Stuart a hand.